Afternoon. My name is Jim Lanigan, and I want to thank you all for attending today's Automating AP for Mass Retail, Approvals and Processing Made Easy. This presenter, Mr. Marty Michael, CEO of Miria Systems, is the CEO and Chief Cloud Strategist at Miria Systems. At Miria, we are looking to the future of information management, and as an IBM Business Premier Partner, we enable customers to achieve the highest level of business return on investment between their legacy world and the highly connected cloud environment. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Marty Michael.
Thank you, Jim, and I appreciate everybody for joining us online today. The overall discussion this afternoon will take approximately 25 to 30 minutes, at which time we will have some time at the end for questions and answers. Please make a note of the email address on the screen right at the moment for jlanigan@miriasystems.com. It'd be helpful if you want to bring up your email during the presentation, and if a question comes up, do it right over to Jim, and then we'll try to get to those questions at the end of the conversation. So with that, with any further discussion, I'm going to move forward here. The agenda we're going to cover today is business focus. We're going to talk about business challenges. We're going to talk about the business case for automation of AP. We're going to talk about the different components, or at a very high level, how AP automation works. In retail, it's more challenging, and we're using the term retail rather generically here. Several of our customers will talk about a couple case studies in the overall presentation to give you examples during the presentation. We'll talk about some other things you might want to consider in terms of looking at AP automation. What else can you do? What business values can you get from it other than just the automation of accounts payable? And then we'll, as we said, we'll give some time for questions and answers. So a little bit, first of all, about Miria Systems. Miria has been around for 25 years. We're in process automation and content enablement. We're developers of a product called Managed Pay. It's an AP automation solution. We're not going to talk in terms of a lot of our product today. We're mostly focused on helping the audience to understand the AP automation value proposition, but there will certainly be time that we'll be glad to answer any questions about our products later in the discussion. We're a premier IBM business partner, and we specialize in content management and business analytics. We have multiple industry expertise across intelligent capture, complex document management, work process automation and case management, accounts payable, medical records, and engineering information management. And all of these fall into the category of enterprise content management, and the way we approach most of our solutions for our customers is how do you take this big word of enterprise content or unstructured data and put it into action in the business. Miria manages or offers solutions across the full business process. If you read the slide from left to right, most of the enterprise content management projects usually start with some around capture or intelligent capture. How do you turn paper into data? We talk about how do you activate it or make it part of your business process. How do you socialize it? Make it collaborative across the enterprise. Analyze it to obtain business intelligence. And then, of course, you need to be able to govern it, whether that's for compliance or for just long-term business reporting requirements. But Miria offers solutions across this full spectrum of the value proposition of enterprise content management. I said before that we're IBM Premier Business Partner. We are focused around the ECM or Content Management Suite of IBM. IBM's premier products in the area of capture is DataCap. The DataCap is an intelligent capture solution, and the primary product around content management is IBM FileNet P8. And Miria has certifications and expertise around both of those, including Cognos and Maximo, where integration of this type of content and data can be applied to the business process in many different areas. So we're going to dive right into it. That's the 3-minute commercial on who is Miria. We're going to dive right into the AP business challenge and how do you obtain a measurable return on investment. So talk a little bit about it. I said we were going to focus today on the mass retailer. You know, some of the biggest business challenges that customers have in that space, whether it's a restaurant chain, a sporting goods chain, a large apparel operation, a lot of the challenges are the same. Multi-location retailers have to process and manage a large number of vendor invoices across a very wide network. It may be nationwide, it may be regional, it may be worldwide. They'll often have to deal with invoices in multiple formats. They'll usually be working through an inefficient review, match, and approval process. If you're manually inputting the information, you probably have a high error rate when keying in data, and a high error rate may only be 5% or 10%, but even small error rates can add up to large costs in the overall process. Most of the customers we talk to in this space are challenged with an inability to proactively manage vendor discounts or requests and communications, changes in invoices, credits that have to go back and forth. There's been delays in payments which cause vendor processing or vendor relations issues. If, for example, you have a store in Cleveland and invoices are coming in there for repair work or even for local inventory items, and those invoices have to get sent back somewhere for corporate approval, and that process time back and forth can add up to delays. There's really lost time managing phone calls and limited visibility on the overall cash flow if invoices are being grouped or held at the remote locations before they send out. You may have already taken the steps to centralize this processing and send that in to a central location so it's not going to your store locations, but in itself creates another set of challenges. Now you still have to get that in there and get it back for approvals, or you make the decisions that you're going to approve it only at a corporate level. Either way, the overall process can be quite challenging depending on the number of locations you have. So we've sat down with our customers and put together something we call best practice requirements. Now this is something that we've done completely on our own. There are a lot of good consultants out there that help only in the automation of accounts payable for clients. But some things we think are important for business best practice requirements is the business process should reinforce strong internal controls and best practices. The process needs to be scalable, and you need to be able to streamline it to manage the overall costs. Ability of authorizations, approvals, and reviews in the process is important. If you have large ticket items, over $1,000, you may want that to go to different levels of management for approval, and you need to be able to manage that into a process. You need visibility, including audit trails, who approved what when, or who changed what when, who ordered what when. All those are important pieces of information. Then you'll be able to manage the vendor information and communications. You may set up corporate contracts to buying power across the organization, but if your locations don't know about it or aren't using them, then you may lose some of the value that you are trying to achieve from that negotiated centralized contract. And then, of course, compliance and oversight are key important issues in terms of managing accounts payable. So now what does all this turn into from a money standpoint? Remember, this section is about return on investment. Your first issue that you want to achieve is increase FTE productivity, or full-time equivalent. If you're typing in every invoice, whether that's regionally, locally, or centrally, that can add up into a lot of headcount depending on your operation and the number of invoices. If you're trying to capture only header information, then it's one piece of it. It's one burden on your resources. But you're trying to capture line item detail, and you need to type in that level of detail, which some of our customers do. Then it adds up to a lot more in terms of energy and manpower time. You also need to look at, in the final impact, the cost to reduce paper handling and storage. I mean, managing and storing invoices for the long term and file cabinets is pretty outdated today, and by centralizing your AP solution or an ECM strategy, you can store all that content where it's searchable and accessible to the rest of the business, as opposed to we're processing invoices, we're paying them, and we're filing. Obviously, there's an opportunity to improve accuracy of financial forecasting, improve the document process and flow control. Accessibility to real-time information becomes a great area to get business value, and and return on investment. The relations issue that we talked about before can be very valuable. A lot of our customers are doing what's called dynamic discounting, where they allow their vendors to go in through a portal and select when they want to be paid, and then bring back a significant discount for that. That helps to greatly reduce your overall cost of goods and operations, and it's a very powerful thing when you're working with smaller vendors across a wide network of retail chains. So moving on, that's some of the values. Now, this information here on this slide that I'm showing you is gathered sort of average from several different partners that we saw, or several different organizations we cited there. Ardent Partners, Aberdeen Group, Paystream Advisors. These are some of the premier consulting firms that analyze this process and make recommendations back. And you can get a lot of information right off the internet or right off of these people's websites if you want to get it to validate this. But they know that the company average cost to process an invoice in non-automated process is $19 per invoice. With invoices, a processor can handle is $1,500, and there you can do your own math if you fit category and figure out how many people you probably need to process invoices. Today's cycle time, the percentage of invoices received by paper a lot of times is 80% in this scenario, and you may be getting invoices in by EDI, you may be getting them in by email or sources today, which we'll address later in the presentation. By the way, they all have to be processed. Now we get into the best-in-class scenario put together by these same consultants. They'll show you that through invoice automation, it's very possible to reduce your cost per invoice down to less than $2. It's very possible to quadruple the processing rate of the number of people. And if you can do the math and you take your own division by the number of invoices you're in your own organization, you can kind of do your own cost comparative analysis here. Or you can feel free to follow up with, after the presentation, we have a spreadsheet we can plug your numbers into and give you that data back to you. That includes not only looking at the number of process for invoices, but what are likely error rates and what's the cost for that, what's the cost for your approval cycles. This adds up into time and money, and that's really the main thing that you're trying to accomplish by AP automation. You're trying to reduce the overall cost and impact of processing, something that we all have to do in every organization, and that's paying your bills. Another fact from the consultants here is, what are the top drivers that drive organizations to automation? Number one driver at the top of the list is lack of visibility into invoices and AP documents. We meet with many organizations about this every week, every month, and their particular pains around this can be quite varied. As I said before, some of them try to centralize everything. Some try to send all their invoices back to regional offices and process it there, and many of them try to process it into local stores and or locations where they're processed. By the way, if you're a corporate controller and you need to manage the cash flow in and out, and you really need visibility to what's going to go on in the process and what's got to be paid. Also may have corporate directives to lower costs. The third thing there was difficulty finding and managing paper-based documents. Our strategy when we talk about AP automation is not just to collect that data and stick it in the ERP. You're still going to need to keep copies of those invoices. You also need to keep copies of material, the data sheets, or safety related that came in with that invoice. You have other pieces of information such as multiple packing slips that come in from different receipts because the order didn't come in fulfilled and complete. All that content and documented information really should be retained and stored somewhere, and the best place to do that is electronically inside of an enterprise content management system where we expose it to an automated business process, but then also expose it to driving direct business intelligence by searching and finding that information when you need it. Talk a little bit in very basic terms about the components of AP automation. What's it really look like in terms of software and a solution? So in very basic terms, there's 3 steps to automating your AP. You have to receive it. You may get them in by paper, through mail. You may get them by fax machine, by email, by EDI, There may be an e-invoice process in place, or you may have some other way that invoices come into your operation. After you receive those in, now you have to process them. The first of processing them is you have to read them, then you have to validate them, you have to match it possibly to a purchase order or to an approval process. You have to send it for approval or at least expose it to somebody who says, yes, I ordered it, yes, I received it, yes, you can pay the bill. So that requires a workflow process to move it back and forth, whether that's a simple 3 by 5 inch mail routing slip on a sticky note or an automated computerized system. You still have to manage that process. There may be alerts that come in. You may have something set up where every invoice over a certain amount has to go to a certain area for approval. Certain invoices, such as IT related, may all need the approval by the CIO because you don't want a business line manager ordering computer parts or those types of things. All those possibilities in your process need to be planned for in terms of auditing this process. Then the third step is obviously you have to pay it. Now you can pay it by check, wire, ADH, P-cards, discount management is a part of the process I explained before. You may have to plan vendor communications. If you're like most of our customers, they have people in their AP staff that spend more of their time answering vendor questions about when am I going to get paid, what's the status of my check, why did you short pay me $20 on this invoice. All communication is part of this overall process. It should be addressed in a complete solution for AP automation. So let's come backwards a minute now and let's get into the real world and talk about the challenge of retail with a case study. Now, one of our customers, and I do have a documented case study that I can provide, is P.F. Chang's restaurants. They own two different two different restaurant chains, the P.F. Chang's China Bistro and the Payway, the smaller Chinese operation. Chinese food operation, excuse me. They have approximately 350 locations across the country. Their central headquarters is in Scottsdale, Arizona. They're processing about 150,000 invoices. Processing those in by fax machine, by things, by email, company operation, and then it ties in the back into a Great Plains system, Exapta, which is where all of the payments are processed in their ERPs. P.F. Chang's, this is a quote right there from Tammy Waleski, the director of the financial operations there, who put the system in. They went out and looked for an automated application, and they chose the pay application in order to be able to centralize that operation. Now, if you think about their business process prior to automating, what would happen is at the restaurant locations, the general manager at that location would take all of the invoices incoming every week, stick them in a FedEx envelope, FedEx them off to Scottsdale, where they would get processed. Somebody would manually type and enter them into their AP system. And then often those invoices would have to be sent back to different locations, sometimes back to the store, sometimes back to a regional manager, where they would have to get approval on those invoices. And there was a question and an answer. Sometimes this process happened 2 or 3 times before an invoice was finally completed for payment. And the other thing is those general managers are usually restaurant managers and people that are focused on their customer service. They're not necessarily great paperwork people as far as how this is managed. So we really needed to streamline the process and automate it so that everything was as simple as possible. With the implementation of that solution, what they really ended up with is, at the end of every day, their general manager could take an invoice, every related document, stick a fax machine, put a button back to corporate to a specialized mailbox, and then the software would receive, pull all the information out, pull the data off of it so that it was entered directly into their Great Plains system, and the controller could see the payables immediately, back to the organization electronically so that each store location could pull it up and get it electronically within an hour after they sent it and do their approvals right electronically online through a role-based interface. There was a question that had to happen had to go back and forth between AP, a regional office, or a store location. That could happen electronically because they were all looking exactly at the same document in real time. And this greatly streamlined their overall process and gave them a great return on investment in terms of business value. And as I said, there is a printed copy of that available for download. If you're interested in that, please send an email to Jim Lanigan and we'll get that over to you. So moving on, some of the basic functions of AP, getting into a little bit more detail, are you have to be able to handle document scanning and capture. You're able to configure the workflows and validations for many different workflow processes. You need to be able to pre-match and for a purchase. If an invoice comes in and it's already been approved through a purchase order process, we'd be able to match that up, and if it's all the same, it's already approved. We don't need to write it anywhere. We should be able to give email notifications and manage exceptions that may come through. You built-in tracking and searching. You need ERP integration, and you need the full analytics and audit trail capabilities that you get in terms of being able to get business intelligence out. So when you look at the solution in the diagram here on the next page, I'm going to walk you through the process in a little bit more detail. The first part is the capture process. This is where IBM DataCap comes in. You'll see in this diagram we're talking about receiving invoices or any documents in, for that matter, by fax, by mail, by email, and then get sent to an image processing process. The DataCap software, OCRs pulls the characters off of the image and decodes them and turns them into text. It indexes them to make sure that we have the right information. We validate the invoice. We do a lookup on the account name, for example, or the vendor name. If it's a purchase order match invoice, we look up the purchase order in the purchasing order system. They take the image of the invoice itself and store it in the content management system down at the bottom, where it's searchable for here and forever if you want it to be. Next, in the same process, as I said, most of the time during the imaging processing, we're also tying in directly to different systems. Down the bottom of the screen, you'll see that we'll tie to the purchasing system to get that PO information. There'll be an inventory management system or a point-of-sale system at the location where we will extract line item detail off of the invoice and put that back in there, back into the point-of-sale system. For example, you're a retail chain and you're doing direct-to-store delivery, and the invoices are all happening at the point of location. There's no purchase order a lot of times for supplies that they order. The trucker comes in with a checklist, goes out to the truck, brings that inventory in. He goes back to his corporate that night where they send you an invoice for what was brought into the store that day. We can pull that same item information off the invoice and bring it back into your point-of-sale system if you want to for your local inventory management. And then, of course, the last part is the accounting system. And one picture that's not on here that I'll show you in another slide, you tie into your corporate Active Directory or your LDAP, which is your corporate structure and your hierarchy in it. If you have already an LDAP set up in terms of your corporation, we already know who reports to who in the system. So routing from inside the workflow routing can all be managed by certain items based on rules to their boss or to other approvals, I'm pulling it out of that LDAP. Next part of the process here, mailed up to the top of the screen, a vendor portal. Now, vendor portal is a secure web access website that you allow your vendors to come in, sign in, and start meeting functions around their AP process. They can submit an e-invoice, they can download particular information possibly if you want to expose it to them. They can do a query to see, okay, where is my invoice that I submitted 15 days ago? Is that submitted? Has it been approved? We can expose as much information as you want to that vendor so that you can reduce the phone calls, reduce the vendor communication back and forth. You also can manage purchasing cards inside of a single system. Travel and expenses can be integrated so that you're using one single process for the management of and the approvals for all expenditures. And of course, there's an EDI interface that you may be involved with. We get for some clients, we take feeds from the credit card companies so that if they manage expenses or if your cards are managed by American Express, all that's done automatically and into the system, but it still gets routed through your approval process. All this happens in this block here, which manages the interaction back and forth. The common workflow processing system is a product called Managed Pay. It is the product of Miria Systems, and we do have it installed and used by many customers in this sector. But we manage the workflows in here. It is the web-based interface that vendors sign into and look at. It's a web-based interface that locations all sign in and look and have visibility to the process as a workflow. Your purchase detail is passed back and forth to your purchasing system. Line items, as I said before, all your coding and approval and payment data. Your payments are still happening in your ERP system, whether it's Exapta, ADA, or whatever. But when the check gets cut and the date gets cut, when it goes in the mail, all that information comes back to Managed Pay so we can expose it to your vendor if you choose to do so. So if you take that process, just to make sure you understand it a little bit further and whittle it down, let's talk about the capture process a minute. And what's shown here on the screen is an invoice on the right, and I'm showing what would happen in this capture process. So if I take this invoice and I take the relevant data on here, as you see here, I take, for example, the green bar at the right, where you see the payment summary information up there. The purple outlines the vendor name. They have the blue box down halfway to the right that shows payment terms, and line item detail is in the gold down at the bottom. Now, the invoice is hard to read, but the truth is this is the way you see a lot of these invoices. They get stamped with received or posted over the top of information. Your processors may be having time pull this information out. We're not going to show it today, but the product we have, the solution we have for capture is the IBM DataCap product, and it is fantastic at pulling all this information off of here accurately. That's another demonstration that we can show you if you have interest in it, or you can go to our blog site where we have 2 or 3 videos there that will illustrate this. But your goal here in the capture, index, and validate process is to capture the relevant data, extract the header information, line items, memorize prior invoice formats. If an invoice comes in and changes, or you get an invoice from a new vendor, the system is set up to manage that to a creation of a new vendor, which may need an approval process inside of your organization. That all goes to a queue to manage that process. We validate it. It's not done arbitrarily. We'll take as much data as we can and do a lookup. For example, if we come in, this says from Coca-Cola USA, Atlanta, Georgia, but if for some reason the data was obscured, we can still match that back to your ERP system so that we're not creating random vendors. It gets managed the same way you would manage it if you were manually inputting it. And then, of course, this image itself is stored electronically for reference later. Now, just a little bit about the Consolidate and Enable port of this process, the vendor portal and purchasing cards. Purchase cards are becoming a big deal to a lot of our customers, and they put them in order to streamline this type of purchases that are happening at their local or distributed offices. But itself creates a whole new system that you need to manage. So we've got the step of integrating purchasing card management inside of the system, so it's all done in exactly the same process. Also manage the vendor interactions inside of here with W-9 form processing can be handled for new vendors. We also take care of, I mentioned before, travel expenses. If you have a travel expense system that's already done on Curian or some other system, you may not need this part of it, but it's not a I need everything, it's a use it all or it doesn't work system. This is very modular, and you can just use only to this, as you'll see in a couple case studies in a moment. And then, I can't emphasize this enough. If you look at AP system and they're bringing the data in and they're just sticking the information in a database, or perhaps they're not storing the images at all, it's pretty important in today's world to make sure that you have a strong archive of what you pay and what your process is and what your documents are. So we really advocate bringing that content and those images in and storing them right in a content management system, and our preference is IBM FileNet, which is able to work directly with the Managed Pay process. I've already talked about the integration points here. I won't go too much farther than those, except for one of the great points here is a lot of our customers we say they spend a lot of time applying GL codes or fixing GL codes that are misapplied while in the field. And we can set up rules in the system. The managed application allows us to put together various business rules. So it's not just, okay, this looks like a restaurant, so it's meals. You know, we can set 2 and 3 levels of rules in the system so that you make sure you get the right GL codes if that's important to you. I'm going to touch a little bit about workflow. We've used that term sort of generically here. When we're talking about workflow, we're talking about the process of moving business process between multiple people in order to meet your business outcome. And we've got inside of Managed Pay is we actually use drag and drop visual workflow modeling tools. This is actually done in conjunction with your business people when we set up the system. And this is actually leveraging the IBM BPM application right out of FileNet, which allows us to manage this workflow. That really streamlines the process because you don't have to learn a new tool if you're already using the FileNet application. But it's also one of the most powerful tools out there for managing complex workflows. So this example just shows you the icons there, and this is drag and drop. We can, for example, we put together a check status. We want to route it for approval. I'm not going to try to go through all the details. It'd take a long time if we did that in here, but I just want to give you an idea. This particular workflow is an example of a trade or a purchase order-based invoice. That may have a different workflow process. Well, it most likely will than a non-PO base. And we can configure the percentage that are passed by setting up rules. This one here is for tax audit queues. So there may be certain invoices that come in that require special handling from state, local tax handling, and we can extract that data out separately, send the invoice over to a queue if you want to manage it that way, where you have an auditor perhaps that needs to get eyes on each one of these, or we can pull the data out and do a sampling of each one of them if the auditor only wants to review perhaps 10% of to come out. But that allows you to pull out this tax information without having to send it to a whole department to process every invoice. Multi-level processing is available. I gave you the scenario before of an invoice comes in, and in some cases the invoice comes in, part of it needs to be approved by the IT manager, part of it needs to be approved by the regional manager, all of it needs to be approved by the local office that ordered that, so we can manage that multiple complex routing back through your organization so that you can get the approvals you need on the process without holding up the overall process. Now, this is not exactly on this particular workflow here. Practices is a term that gets used a lot today in terms of setting up how you want to manage your business. And if you're an ISO 9000 or 9001 company, you have documented practice processes around AP, or maybe need to have those in place, we help you set up and manage that. And frankly, it doesn't have to just be around accounts payable, because with the managed pay integration with DataCap and the FileNet backend, we can essentially take any work order process or workflow process and manage it for best practices. One of our customers actually manages what is basically a sales order process where they handle custom products that need to be printed with certain logos and information. All of that's being managed through the same application, but with just different business rule sets. That allows the AP automation application to be extended to other business values, so it's not a one application solution. So a couple case studies, and then we're going to wrap it up. I think we're about 35 minutes or so into this right at the moment. But large case retail case study, this is an example here of a large operation. This would be someone doing mass retail, like a large sporting goods or a large consumer product store operation. You'll see there that the decoding and the capture is surrounded by the blue block on the left where DataCap comes into play. Their particular case is integrated directly to IBM FileNet for the content management system. The ERP systems in place are JDA for supply chain, for the purchasing process, and for the back accounting. And you have the other box there is the LDOP hierarchy. In this particular case study, they're using complete and a vendor portal, purchasing, travel and expenses, and EDI, all through the same application, the same process that we put together for them. Coming back over, this is a block diagram of the PFA, the example I gave you earlier, where I showed you that they're integrating the Great Plains down at the bottom, and their inventory point-of-sale system is a part of that. They are also using IBM DataCap for the capture and the imaging, and IBM FileNet P8 for the back end. And if you go today to the IBM website, do a search for Accounts Payable Solution, you'll find some information about, best practices around accounts payable automation, especially from the ECM approach to solve that problem. But we really like these examples because I think they're really illustrative of a lot of the pains a lot of the customers that are WebEx today, might have. We're going to wrap it up here in a minute. I want to remind you in the next minute, if you have any questions, please email those over to Jim Lanigan. And we will take 1 second here in a moment. I'm going to buy a little bit of time so we can address a couple of questions he signaled with me that are coming in right now. While I'm waiting on that, just a couple slides here. This is a picture of Managed Pay version 5 with a dashboard for scanning metrics that shows scanning by operator and scanning by month, time to process. On the left side of the screen, you'll see queues or folders. It's sort of an Outlook concept, or Microsoft Outlook, where everything goes into folders virtually on the left so that you can manage your work process through that, depending on where you're at. Each user that signs into Managed Pay has a different view, and they see different things. A office that's in Cleveland, if you have a store there, when they signed in, they would see only their invoices. The regional manager that maybe manages all the Ohio and Pennsylvania Valley would sell the store information if he wanted, and then that goes all the way up to corporate hierarchy, where AP processing and corporate would be able to see everything and see the progress of invoices through the overall system. Other metrics there, vendor invoicing analysis, what's coming in month to month or week to week, payment term information. If you want to do basic analysis on this, you can. And then more importantly, all the customers are really taking a deep dive on business intelligence today. So we expose all this data and information out to broader tools such as Cognos or Crystal Reports. You need to be able to do deeper dive analysis. That's very possible. And I think we've bought enough time. This is the screen for invoices process, invoices by type, average days to process. These are all great metrics. And I think we're almost to here. Okay, we've got a couple questions posed we'll go through right now. Okay, so first question, how does it take to complete an accounts payable automation project? Well, this is difficult to say, but a lot of it depends on where your maturity of your organization. If you're a customer that's doing everything manually today, it's actually somewhat easier to do than perhaps an organization that has varying degrees of automation across different parts of their organization. You should be able to get thing up in about 9 days. You should be able to get this value out of the system, depending on where you're at. Where we normally start, if somebody's totally manually, we normally start the capture part and help start bringing data off immediately and capturing those invoices electronically, and then we move into the workflow at the end of that 90 days to complete the rest of the system. If you have a very complex operation with a lot of different touch points, if you're doing expenses and P cards and you have multiple business processes you want to automate, we could take anywhere from 6 to 12 months for a project like that. But the important thing to know about AP automation is you should be able to get a measurable return on investment in less than 12 months. The business value is there in terms of reduction of labor costs, reduction of paper handling costs, and other things that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Question, I already have a scanning solution to automate invoice capture. Will your products still be able to improve our operation? Yes, absolutely. This is probably the most prevalent that we see is many customers have implemented invoice capturing over the last 5 to 10 years, but didn't take that final step. They may be extracting that data out and sticking the images off on a file storage somewhere, which works, but it doesn't allow you to get the full value out of it. And then they're probably extracting the data out and do a batch file upload to the ERP system. What usually they're missing is that overall management of the routing process and the workflow enablement and the overall of how you tie this together. On your website, you suggest managed pay can also be used to manage other processes such as warranty tracking and rebate management. Can you explain that further? Yes. As we said, we've had some of our customers, especially in the retail space, take the same platform. We put together different queues and we put together different routing processes. So, for example, a warranty, if you're selling a clothes dryer and there's warranty paper work that goes with that you want sent back and managed. Well, same type of process. You can sit on the fax machine, bring it back. The OCR will pull the relevant data off of it, put that into your warranty tracking system or maybe your management support system, and then we'll store the warranty paperwork inside of the content management system so it's exposed to other processes. But this happens within the same managed pay application. It's just a different modeling of the same, it's just a different configuration right in the same application. Okay, I have one more question we didn't get on text, and it says, multiple ERPs, can we connect? Yes, there are 2 integration strategies to manage pay today. One is, in simplest terms, many of our customers want to go with an ETL strategy, extract, transform, and load, which happens through a batch process. And that can obviously be handled with, be set up to manage any other application. It's the quickest and the least invasive type of integration. Especially if you're an organization that has multi-ERPs, you have processes that are changing. Perhaps you're 1 year into a 2-year SAP implementation and need to address this, but you don't want to try and integrate it all at once. So an ETL strategy works for that. The strategy of how do we connect to other systems is we use a third-party enterprise bus architecture highway from information builders. That allows us to do real-time integration and map it back to virtually any other application. It has all the built-in connectors. And the reason why we do that is a lot of our customers are already using it, so they're familiar with it and they're familiar with how it works. But more importantly, a lot of the customers in this space may have multiple ERPs. They may have bought one 3 years ago that was on J.D. Edwards. They may have Oracle Financials version 7 in another place, PeopleSoft 9, maybe going in their corporation, and they'd be able to manage this process, but they have multiple systems that the tables are coming out of or being managed in. And with the iWay integration solution and with the managed pay, we can send amongst those and work with multiple systems at the same time without it being, a challenge. Any more questions? Okay, it does look like it. So with that, I just want to remind you here, my name is Marty Michael. I am the managing partner of Miria Systems. If you have other questions after this webinar, please send them to Jim Lanigan. This webinar will be published and available on our website within about 48 hours, and you will receive a follow-up link to that. We would really appreciate it if you have other people in your organization that would like to see it. Please forward it on to them, and we'd be glad to go through this again for anybody who has more questions. That's why we're here. Thank you. Have a great day.